Everybody wants to know the best beginner reloading kit, and I have a confession to make. I don't like reloading kits. Pretty much all of them. Why? I started out with this reloading kit, and today I use almost none of it. The goal for today's video is to help you spend the money on the tool you need the first time, and not the extra stuff that you're never going to use that just takes up space. Like any other tools, there are different grades of tools, and some are more suited to some things than others. Most kits still don't include things like calipers to measure, ways to clean your brass, ways to trim your brass, all very basic functions that every reloader needs when you start with a kit or not. So let me dispel that first myth, that kits are a one-stop solution, because they're not. The functions every reloader needs to perform are pretty basic. We need to be able to resize brass, insert that new primer, dispense the powder, and reseat the new projectile. Overall, not too complicated. In my opinion, the first thing you should look at is the press you really want. Now, if cost is your primary driving factor, you're going to be going with Lee. I'm not sure any other brand offers what they do at the lowest price possible. I'm not sure if it's fair to call them the Harbor Freight of the reloading world or not. Sometimes you just need a tool to perform a function. I have a whole video series that covers choosing the correct reloading items for you, including presses, but try not to get hung up on the kit, especially if you're compromising on the press you really want if cost is not your primary driving factor. Higher end presses cost more, for a reason, and likely they'll hold their value longer. Let's go through my Hornady kit as an example and talk about what's good and what's not. But I would encourage you to do this with any kit you're thinking about. One of the first things the kit contains is a reloading manual, and this is fine, especially if you're using Hornady projectiles. Overall, you're going to need a manual, and this certainly was not a waste of money. The next item is the press. This is Hornady's single-stage classic press. This press is okay, but it wasn't what I wanted, and after quite a while, I got very tired of the bushing system. Initially, I thought it would save me a huge amount of time, but as I added die sets, I had to keep buying more bushings, or resetting my dies every single time. Simply the added cost of these bushings, and I have over 30 of them here, would eat up all of the savings that the kit provided over the coax. Now this isn't a commercial for the coax, but it's a great press that I highly recommend to anyone who wants them. It gets rid of shell holders and bushings. The next thing in the kit is the universal reloading block. What to say? It's good, I still use it, but there are lots of them out there. Nothing particularly special about it, nothing to say good or bad. It's functional. The next thing the kit contains is 3 of these die bushings, which is basically enough for one die set. So if you don't want to keep resetting your dies, you're going to end up buying more bushings. The next thing in the kit is the electronic scale. This particular kit came with the Gen 1 scale, and now I believe they've upgraded to the Gen 2, which both are okay I guess if you're setting up a powder measure, but there are much better options out on the market. There's currently a Gen 3, which the newer kits may be shipping with these days, which is a much better option than either of those two. Nobody seems to want to admit it, but most of the scales that come in these kits aren't very good. The next thing in the kit is the powder measure, and frankly, I believe it's only good if you're using ball powders and throwing most of your charges. I think the Lee scoop set or the Lee powder measure would have suited me more, and this didn't even come with the base. It's sold separately. It was a waste of money for me, but it might not be for you. Our next item for discussion is this powder trickler. If you want to weigh every single charge, you need one of these, but frankly, this one stinks. You need something much heavier and a little bit taller, and for me, the Lyman fits the bill. I'll talk more about it later, but I don't recommend this at all. The next thing it came with is a powder funnel. It works fine, there's lots of options from different manufacturers, and these universal ones tend to work just fine. The next tool is the chamfer and deburring tool. Now Hornady's tool works just fine, and I've used it quite a bit. It's a decent tool. But frankly, if you're buying things separately, I would just get the Lyman. It's nicer, sharper, and it can perform more functions. The next thing it comes with is a hand priming tool. And it works okay, I guess. It's functional. But you're going to end up having to buy shell holders. I think it's well worth your money to buy a separate option, either from RCBS or the Frankfurt Arsenal, that comes with its own case. The next thing this kit comes with is case lube. One-shot case lube, some people like it, some people don't. If you're loading for pistol only with carbide dies, you might not even need any. Personally, the gold standard for me is Imperial sizing wax, and one container goes an awfully long way. So for me, I don't use most of this kit. It wasted my money, and it takes up space in my reloading room. This analysis should be done for any kit you might be looking at. So if I don't use this kit, what do I use? Let's go through every step of the reloading process, and I'll show you some equipment options that I would recommend depending on what level of reloading you want to do. At some point, your brass is going to be dirty, and you're going to need to clean it. Standard vibratory tumblers work, but if you're doing your entire process indoors, I would encourage you to look to wet tumbling. The Frankfurt Arsenal rotary tumbler or the mini one are reasonable options. Originally, I spent a lot of time tumbling, but in reality, you can get your brass clean enough in 15 to 30 minutes with some dish soap and some Lemashine. For this video, I'm ignoring annealing completely. If you're starting out, just don't worry about it. Learn how to beat the performance of factory ammo first, and then go down that rabbit hole as far as you want to go. I consider this an add-on item that needs more individual consideration. Now, if you're reloading for F-Class, you may need this step, but don't let annealing keep you from getting started in the first place. To perform sizing, we're going to need to start with some type of a lube. Imperial Size and Die Wax is pretty much the gold standard, but if you want to try others, there's lots of options. But the most common ones I hear of these days are either Hornady One-Shot, the Wax, or Dillon Case Lube, or some homemade version of it. The Dillon Case Lube is simply made of lanolin and alcohol. They all seem to work fairly well. When starting to size, I recommend starting out with a standard full-length sizing die. I have videos comparing all the brands, but a standard full-length die set correctly is what you really need. To be able to set it correctly, I would encourage you to invest in a set of comparators. The Hornady set is a minimum, but if you want a set of nicer tools, the Short Action Custom set is my personal favorite. Let your budget decide. Some people have turned to these case gauges, but in my opinion, you can't properly set your bump with these gauges. They'll tell you if it fits in your chamber, not if your bump is consistent or correct. This is not going to be a replacement for a proper headspace gauge. Another thing when we talk about sizing I'd like to mention is a stuck case remover. Unless you're immune to Murphy's Law, I recommend picking up a stuck case remover just so you don't ever need it. It's better to have it and not need it versus the other option. These aren't too expensive, and I think they're a good tool to have laying around. For trimming, this probably has the wildest variance of tools that I would recommend. If you're on the slimmest of budgets, the lead cutter and lock stud system is well worth the cost by far, and you can use it with a drill if you have the correct adapters. It has a small cost to add new calibers, and for the budget conscious, I don't think it can be beat. The biggest downside that you can argue is this is touching the inside of your necks while it's doing the trimming process. But we're going to have to increase our cost if we don't want that to happen. The next option up for me is the Lyman Universal Trimmer. It's okay, but it's certainly not today what I would recommend. The more universal something tends to be, the more compromises are being made. This requires the use of pilots and is still having the same issue with the necks. Personally, I would stick with the Lee system, and if you don't like it, step up a little bit to the Wilson system. If I had only 2 words to describe this trimmer, it's boringly consistent. You do need to have these separate case holders by caliber, but the locks keep the adjustments in place, and even if you're not using the power adapter, the cutter works great by hand. I haven't done a full review on this yet, but the price point is reasonable depending on what configuration that you pick. No matter which of these tools you're using, you're still going to need a chamfer and deburr your cases, and I would choose the Lyman tool to do it. It's a very high quality option for the cost. Another option you might think about is the Frankfurt Arsenal Case Prep Center. As long as there's a shoulder on your case to index off of, it can work very well, but it does have to be set up every single time. The most expensive option is frankly my favorite tool, the Giraud Case Trimmer. It's the fastest way to trim, chamfer, and deburr all at the same time, and overall, this is my favorite reloading tool because of how good a job it does and the amount of time it can save you. I know that these are a lot of different options, but frankly, I think you should make your decision based on your budget. Lee's a great starting point, the Wilson trimmer works excellent, and if you can afford the Giraud, you won't be disappointed. Now that case prep is done, let's talk priming. There are lots of variants here, but I really wouldn't recommend priming on a press unless you're using something like a progressive and you're strictly loading for quantity. Hand priming is where I would tell you to start. And as I mentioned before, there were 2 options that I would choose from. The RCBS Universal, meaning there's no shell holders, or the Franklin Arsenal Hand Primer. Both are going to pretty much cover all of your needs. If your hands are a little wore out, you might want to look at a bench priming system. Certainly either one of these 2 options is going to be a huge upgrade over the standard priming systems that come in most kits. Our next step is measuring powder. This is where you're going to get yourself into the most trouble. A good scale that you trust is very important. Some guys like balance beams, but they're just not for me. I would recommend 2 different starter options, one of these being the G3, or Johnny's Reloading Bench seems to be standard anymore, using the Marksman Digital Reloading Scale. Both are going to come with a usable pan and a reasonable scale. I have not seen a kit yet that comes with a scale that I would recommend if you plan on weighing every single charge. For dispensing powder, a basic setup might be a set of Lee scoops and the Lyman trickler. This trickler works very well, it's heavy, it has adjustable height, and it's super easy for me to clean out even for ball powders. Being easy to clean is very important to me when I'm testing multiple powders in very small lots. A nice step up might be one of the auto dispensers from RCBS or Lyman. If price is no object, an A&D FX120i is a great scale, and can be had from CE products for a little under $500. If you buy the scale, it's an upgrade path to something like the Auto Trickler if you wanted to end up there and still be able to enjoy the ability to measure a single kernel of powder on your scale. And I'm sure you could resell this monster on eBay if you didn't like it. Don't worry, it's not a requirement to get started. The simple Horny scale will do the job, but realize there's always going to be something nicer. No matter what scale you choose, get a set of check weights to make sure your scale is reading consistently. This is the best investment for your safety, in my opinion, because you've got to be able to trust your scale, or you shouldn't even start reloading. Now, when it comes to dumping your powder, the universal scales work pretty well, and frankly, I've got no problem on Horny. It works just fine, and I still use it all the time. One tip though, if you're using extruded powders with compressed charges, you might want to look at something as Forester drop tube funnel. This works great for minimizing the crunch when you're seating your projectiles with compressed loads. The last step of our reloading process is seating, and it has its own video in my playlist as well. But let's assume we aren't all perfect and we might make a mistake. Another tool you should have is a puller. A great starting point are these kinetic style pullers. They work very well for small quantities. But if you need to pull a large quantity of projectiles, something like this camlock puller might be what you want to look into, but it does require a different collet for every single diameter of projectile you want to pull. I did not mention them as we went along, but there are going to be multiple steps that require you to measure both case length as well as the seating depth, so you're going to need calipers. Calipers to me are a mandatory tool. I will link 3 different options below. Let your budget choose the calipers that you would like to use. I already mentioned manuals. The Hornady is okay, but any brand is going to be able to teach you the basics. Another item for your consideration might be a set of case neck brushes. These aren't very expensive, and being able to brush all of the garbage out of your case necks before you seat projectiles is a great idea. As we talk about being confident in our tools, a gauge block might be something you'd want to consider. They're not very expensive, and if you want to make sure 1 inch is still 1 inch on your calipers, it might be something you'd like to have laying around. Another thing you might want to think about is some ammo boxes. These are really convenient storage, and I use them all the time. If you plan on utilizing military brass with a crimped primer pocket, you might want to get a crimp remover. Not very expensive, and certainly a needed tool. If you end up picking a press that does need shell holders, a universal kit might be the way to go, but whatever calibers you plan to reload, make sure that it includes what you're going to need. Another tool to consider might be these primer pocket gauges. These are essentially go and no-go gauges for both large and small primer pockets, so if you want to know if yours are getting too loose, these are a quick and easy way to do it, and they're not terribly expensive. If you're ready to get started and you want to find the best press for you, check out this video right here, and I hope to see you come back next week. And until then, stay safe in small groups.